Fiction that sparks climate conversations. What is the role of fiction in the environmental discourse? Can stories, the oldest craft of human civilizations, inspire reflection and action? Academic Joya John, in conversation with debate authors Gigi Ganguly and Sonali Prasad, will discuss the journey and future of environmental stories. And yes, with a great round of applause, may I please invite Ms. Joya John onto the stage, the host for this session. Ms. Joya is an assistant professor of literature at Kriya University. Her research sits at the intersection of South Asian literary and cultural studies and the environmental humanities, and has so far focused on issues of environment and ecology in Hindi fiction and poetry. She teaches courses on genre, translation, and environmental communication at Kriya University. Happy to have you here with us. Moving on to the speakers for this panel. Can we please welcome Ms. Gigi Ganguly onto the stage with a thunderous applause, everyone? She's the author of Biopeculiar, a collection of odd stories about nature that is shortlisted for the Green Honor Book Awards 2025. Congratulations on that. Her first book, a novella titled One Arm Shorter Than the Other, is set around a mysterious repair shop in Old Delhi. Moving on to the second speaker for this panel. Let's welcome her with a thunderous applause, Ms. Sonali Prasad. Please join me right here on the stage. Her current compositions examine social, scientific, and environmental conditions through artistic mediums and related language use. She has used traditional and creative media practices, including long-form reporting, poetry, data, documentary, installations, and visual art. Her journalism has appeared in publications such as The Guardian, The Washington Post, Hakai Magazine, Quartz, and many more. She has also been awarded a Pulitzer Traveling Fellowship, Global TED Fellowship, MIT Knight Science Journalism Fellowship, and the list just goes on. All right, we are absolutely privileged to have the three of you with us right here. With that being said, over to the discussion.
Can you hear me? Thank you all. So I have a lozenge in my mouth because I have a sore throat, thanks to, I've been told, Bangalore's pollen season. But I'm going to keep my notes here. It's a pleasure to introduce and moderate this discussion today. So we'll begin with some short readings, curated readings that we've sort of discussed to set, to marinate some of the discussion. Then we'll have a brief exchange between the writers on their narrative world building, and then open out to general questions about climate and writing in the Indian context, especially. But before we jump in, I'm interested in knowing from the crowd here, what's the most recent, or when you think about environmental fiction, what is it that you reached out for recently? Can you think of something that you've picked up that you would call environmental fiction? Any hands? Show of hands? Anything you've reached out for recently or read? What would, yeah. What's your name?
Mine, Austin. Yeah, Austin Ajit.
Okay.
I recently read Janaki Lennon's My Husband and Other Animals. It's a masterpiece. I love it.
Okay. Do you guys know this? No? No, haven't? Okay, so I think it's sort of an interesting and exciting development that this award has for the first time introduced a fiction, non-fiction session, and we have two fiction writers with us today. So I'm going to ask both Gigi and Sonali to read, and I want you guys to listen for texture, tone, feeling, and I'll open it up for a few responses after each author reads a bit, and then we can take it from there. So Gigi, over to you.
So I'm about to read from a story called Ceaselessly Sea Follows. The sea follows onto lands overburdened with mankind and trees. It takes in a deep breath, a great inhalation, and then it follows. It comes in shapes of waves and tides, washes over inquisitive feet and drenched sand, and sometimes, on rarer occasions, it engulfs roads and houses, people and animals, hopes and griefs. But still it hungers. Inside, even in its darkest depths, it holds multitudes of living, breathing beings. They worship it, make it their home, even though they can't really go anywhere else. And for that, it is grateful. Right on the surface, there are ships and boats, people swimming, drowning, and driving. They don't stay for long until they do. They sink down to the bottom in wreckages of wood and bones. Sometimes there is gold and oil and treasures of all kinds, and yet none of it is enough.
Thank you, Gigi. So, would anybody want to just take a shot at what sort of mood building was happening? What did you, if you want to throw out a word for what you heard or an image that stuck out? Would anybody have anything that strikes you? What sort of mood did you hear in Gigi's writing? No? Anything? A disappointment, okay. Anybody else? Anything that struck you in the mode, tone of the writing? So you heard that. So was that, what's the mood that you were trying to sort of get at from this?
So the image that I had in mind while coming up with this idea was of a huge sea monster which was after people. So I was envisioning a horror movie, a horror story-like situation. So my intention with this was that whoever reads it should feel really unsettled with what has been written, and they should be scared of maybe the sea might be after them. And you're right, there is disappointment from the point of view of the sea's perspective. Like, it wants to basically conquer the entire earth and take over the entire world.
Thank you. So let's do something similar. You can hear this is also to set up a contrast between our writers so you get a sense of their style and their approach. So let's hear from Sonali, and then I might ask you again for what sort of texture or mood you're hearing in her writing.
I think I pick up beautifully from where Gigi left. I'm so grateful that she picked the sea portion of a novel to speak about. So I'm not going to say much before I read, but just a little bit. That the place that I'm talking about is where a wedding reception is happening, and one of the characters was discussing it with her mum. Where's the reception? Arth asked and was startled to hear her scraped voice. You know where, Gul answered without looking up. She was folding the pleats of her sari. Ah, yes, the aquarium by the sea. Arth had visited it at the hotel, and indeed it was a mesmeric place. When the main lights in the hall were turned off, and there was only the lit glass wall, then the blue bent in its lust for water and made the bridge tick. Even the staffers halted in their whale ties and silly octopus hats and watched it swim past the shark over shimmering grass or beside the specially bred clownfish, the one with the brilliant green spot. What did they call it? Picasso? Gatsby? And there were real corals, not like the box at the Tibetan restaurant she frequently visited, which had a printed wallpaper glued inside. Why wouldn't you then wheel in a very sick child and let him tap the bubbles? Why wouldn't you marry it, not the guy in front, knowing at least the blue could last? When she had told the artist about her visit, he nodded and said, yes, but go back for the mermaid. She's a good one, and they have her in the tank sometimes. She knows. Look her in the eye and play rock, paper, scissors. Then you'll know. And so Arth had gone and played with a beautiful blonde girl in a shining purple tail, round after round, for some semblance of knowledge. Rock, paper, scissors. Rock, paper, scissors. Paper covers rock. Scissors cut paper. Rock breaks scissors. Rock, paper, scissors. Stone, water, glass. Stone, water, glass. Glass keeps water. Water sinks stone. Stone beats the bird. Glass beats the bird. Rock, paper, scissors. Rock, paper, scissors. And then it was done. Braced by the words, she had climbed, little bird with stones stung to her chest, up above the buildings, over the waves, to the hanging woods in the sky. And from there, looking down upon the shore's length, she had seen paper conquering rock, rock splitting the land, glass taming water, scissors cutting and seized, water, waiting, waiting. She did not physically visit the aquarium after that and ignored her mother's provocation when she said, "It can't be that serious. Didn't a woman invent it? The aquarium?" Now pressing sideways against a pillow, asked Gul to bring her back a wind chime.
Out in terms of possible differences in texture or mood or in the voices, narrative styles, anything that jumped out at folks? I think we should, so I'll throw the question back to both of you now. When you're hearing each other's excerpts, do you see common strategies of writing? Where do you think there might be sort of departures? What sort of moods did you want to sort of create? So how do you respond to each other's writing?
I mean, first of all, the main difference is, of course, that I've taken the speculative route. And in the excerpt I just read out, it's from the point of view of the sea and what it desires. But I think the topmost common thing between our writing would be how the environment influences the characters, whether they are human characters or animal characters, and how the tense undercurrent that is there inside the lives of the characters, we can see that reflected in the environment as well. So I think both our writings do a really good job of capturing that.
Yeah, I think I do find a lot of kinship in Gigi's writing. There's an atmospheric and philosophical terrain that we both build on. I think that's very similar. I agree with the fact, and I think this is the most potent similarity, is that when we write about subjects like the environment or climate or rupture, as I like to call it in my book, we look at the mirror image within another species or another body. So in the case of my novel, it's the female body. Whatever is happening outside or externally is mirrored within the female body, whether it's through childbirth, whether it's through just menstruation that's happening during a cyclone. You mirror the rupture, you mirror the erosion, the extraction, and the regeneration within the biological form of a female. And in case of Gigi's writing, it's different species. So I think that's a very interesting way of, like, you are looking at the mirror image and kind of trying to define rupture or describe rupture in that way, so it doesn't become overwhelming.
So, listening to the both of you, this sort of writing, let's talk about the classification and what would you call it? So if you were thinking from the point of view of a bookseller, how you slot this book? Like what genre? Because both Biopeculiar and The Glass Bottom as titles kind of defy that classification. They seem to sort of push against, there's no explanatory subtitle which is, tries to sort of slot it. So what categories have worked for you in your head in terms of, is this cli-fi or is this eco-fiction? How would you sort of think about genre and classification?
In my case, it's even more difficult because these are short stories, so there's a third thing on top of it. But when I think of Biopeculiar, I don't think of it as just one thing. I think of it as a short story collection of speculative short story collection of about nature. That's how I join all three genres together, and that's how I think about it. It wouldn't be fair to classify it as just one thing, because then someone will pick it up thinking, oh, it's just about nature, and then they'll be surprised reading about talking otters and like a man herding clouds, and they'll be extremely thrown off by it. So I want it to be seen as a mixture of three things.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting question because I don't think anybody who writes environmental fiction will have a direct answer to it. I have a funny story. So my book's title is Glass Bottom, and for a while, if you type Glass Bottom in Amazon when it first came out, it would come out with all kind of like katori and chammach made out of glass. So my parents were like, okay, you're not even talking about book categorization. You're basically selling utensils. What is this title? But I like the confusion that it creates with booksellers, with readers, and I've kind of let the audience or let the reader decide where it fits for them. I have I've seen people move the book from, say, the drama section or lit fiction section to the poetry section because there is an homage to T.S. Eliot in the way it's constructed, and he's one of the great poets that influenced me. So then they bring it, and I think Megha, one of my really close friends, she calls it a slippery wasteland, the way I've written it. And The Wasteland is a poem by T.S. Eliot, a narrative poem. So it really depends on how you take the book. It is very much like the weather, it's very much like the rhythmic patterns of nature, it's what you observe and what you take from it. And you can slot it wherever you like, as long as you don't put it in the cutlery section, I'm happy.
So for our listeners, both books are available outside. So let's sort of now segue a little bit into what happened when you took the manuscripts, you know, to editors, publishers. You know, these are not a typical bunch of short stories or a novel, right? So tell us, A, how you found yourself working with genre or departing from it. Did you have to take certain kinds of speculative leeway, break narrative form in a certain way? Your characters are no longer necessarily human. So what changed for you in terms of what does this narrative world look like? You can give our readers a glimpse of what's happening so that they might go and buy the book. And then secondly, how did you convince editors about your vision? Maybe we can change it up and start with Sonali.
So I've been very fortunate. If you pick up Glass Bottom, you will see that it is quite fluid in its form. It's got, it's written like a play in some parts. There's a long poem that works as an interlude. It deals with two mother-daughter pairs, and one of the characters kind of embodies the collective consciousness of the planet. So it takes the form of whatever or however she feels about a particular rupture. There are a lot of earthquakes in the book. And her name is Earth, right? So Earth phonetically rhymes with Earth, the planet, in English. But Earth in Hindi also means meaning. So this is one character who in a way is similar to my existence as a writer, as a journalist, is that you're always you're always living in the present, but your consciousness is connected to a collective thought. There's something happening that you cannot keep you present, completely present in the moment. And so she'll be having dinner and she'll be thinking about some drought or famine or something she's read in the paper that completely, takes her out of things. So I think I was very lucky when my editor approached me and she read the manuscript, she read it. At that time it was 16,000 words or something, because as I said, it was more like a narrative poem at that point. Very lyrical, very challenging to sell, probably in a market that doesn't even know what environmental fiction is completely. But I'm very fortunate that there were very few changes that she recommended, or she just wanted me to work on the middle poem and get something that can stand on its own. But I have been very, very lucky that this book exists today in the market that is there. I don't have much pushback to talk about, but I can say that it's been challenging once the book is out, because your readers expect a certain kind of book when it comes to ecological rupture, when it comes to climate writing, and this has been a shock to many, a surprise to many. And I like that, because if you do that as a debut novelist and you don't have any expectations for the future, you really can experiment and take it either way. So I do not feel the weight of any expectation on me, and I think that's the best gift that this novel has given me, that I can take it anywhere I want in the years to come.
I was lucky as well, because when I sent out the manuscript to Westland, they immediately loved the idea. And prior to sending it out to publishers and agents, I had been told that it's difficult to sell a short story collection. First, first of all, you have to send it out to magazines, then build a reputation, and then you can start publishing collections. But this is what I wanted to do, and thankfully I found my publishers in Westland. And the interesting thing about this particular book is that they weren't really publishing sci-fi or speculative fiction prior to this. So with my book, they decided to launch a specific imprint just for speculative fiction. So that was a really cool thing for me. Yeah, and so yeah. That's it.
So budding writers in the room, there is now a special genre brewing on the Indian publishing scene. Okay, so what has been an interesting or infuriating misreading of your work? I'm sure it's because you're experimenting, you've taken a risk, you've put these books out, and I'm sure you've got some pushback. So what's been a reading that's been particularly infuriating, and why?
Before that, I'll just say that what's been really fun and interesting has been, like I've been to 1 or 2 book club meetings, and I've seen how readers respond to my writing, and they talk about things that I never intended. So it's very fascinating to see, okay, this is another way that my writing could be read. And as I said before, because this is a mixture of 3 different things, speculative, nature, and short stories. So if someone who is more inclined towards speculative, they might have some barriers to cross. So that is the only kind of, I won't say a negative thing, because they do read the entire book, and that is my purpose with the writing of the book. But and another good thing is, maybe it sounds like a lofty thing to say, but in a way I am introducing them to things that they are not used to. So that is also something that I feel good about.
I think for my book, the biggest or the greatest conversation that happened was regarding the form of the book, that it doesn't look like a typical novel, or it doesn't flow like a novel. And so that's where the challenge lies. It also has a very deep conversation happening with other arts that exist, whether they're paintings or poetry, or there's a Japanese sculpture that's there in the book right at the end. And so a lot of folks, perhaps that kind of writing is new in India, where people are like, oh my God, you have to have, there's a very short footnote section in the back, but a lot of literature students were like, we got it, but because we read it so-and-so, Moby Dick, there she blows, is a great line, and in my book it says, there she bloats, because something lands on the sea dead, right? But those are things that are known, but if you go a little obscure, things may be a little tangential. But I think, Joya, obscurity is very intentional in my work. It's a way of protecting. Opacity has always been, Edward Glissant said, you protect your characters, your narrative, by giving that veneer of opacity. Because you can't truly understand another person, even the person sitting right next to you, your parents, your partner, your sister, brother. So even if you don't understand the characters but can still cultivate a form of care towards them, is what I wanted my readers to come along with. You should not try to have a complete understanding of Arth's in a life, or her mother Gul, or the relationship between them, because it's just between them, but still have have a sense of care towards them. So I think that was it. People were just trying to get 100% idea of these characters, and somewhere they were like, we can't reach that. But it was completely intentional. It was an act of protection from my side towards these 4 female characters who've lived with me for good. I've done a decade's worth of reporting that's informed the book, and it took me 4 years to get it out. So it's just my way of protecting them and making sure that We reach them, we are close to them, but we don't. You've seen that painting where God touches man but doesn't touch him, doesn't quite yet. So I think that's what the book is trying to do.
Fantastic. How are we doing for time? I think we have about 10 minutes left. So, you know, we've seen a lot of people come in. We have a parallel session, you know, with green business writing. So we use these terms, nature, ecology, environment, but what would they mean for you as writers? How does the environment figure in the writing? Is it a character? Is it a mood? How do you work with, and just at that point, the poster fell. But yeah, so that's the non-material and non-human world asking, what is the environment for you as writers? Maybe Sonali, yeah.
So maybe if somebody wants to answer this from the audience, I'd be really curious to know. When you say environment or nature, what's the one visual or image that comes up in your head? You all must be very visually overloaded, given the times we live in. But what's the one image that comes to your head when we say nature or environment? Anybody?
It's a very shy, reticent audience, I've noticed.
You're in Carbon Park. Come on, like somebody has to say what comes in your head. Do you have a particular image? Trees?
Trees, okay, we have
Anybody
trees.
else? Sorry?
Bounty. Bounty, plentiful.
Bounty, but plentiful, abundance, basically.
I'm almost tempted to call out the people right at the back, but I shouldn't. Right?
Anybody from this side of the
Joya,
aisle?
should I do that job for you?
Yeah.
I think Chintan has his hand up there.
Oh, yes.
There's one here on this aisle also. Oh,
The whole,
whole earth.
So as a visual image, the whole, you're thinking the entire planet, the earth.
Hi, my name is Chintan. Most publishing houses have limited marketing resources, and they tend to focus them on authors who are already well known because they have to get back the advances they've spent on them. So as people who are writing, who are early in their writing journey, what kind of struggles did you go through while having your book marketed and reach readers?
Yes, so Chintan, you threw us you went off tangent. We will come back to your question towards the end. We were doing a little bit of an exercise to try and figure out what comes to mind. Because, when you open these books, when you encounter these books, they're going to be difficult and they're going to be strange and uncanny. So we're just trying to get a sense of how, what images come to mind when you think about this, and then what are our writers doing with these categories?
I think so. You have trees, you have abundance, you have the whole planet. People will say trees, the sea maybe, the mountains, Oh, somebody else. Emotions. Okay, emotions, when you think about nature, like maybe peace, tranquility, maybe smallness. When you're like sitting in front of a mountain, you feel really small and insignificant in a lot of ways. As humans, right? So all of this, basically, it's the quality of awe, right? It's the sublime, the thing that's too big to kind of encapsulate in a single image. That throws us for a loop as writers. Like when you're writing about nature, how do you do this? How do you write about it when you're doing it on the page? It's such a wide canvas. Yeah. Yeah, basically, so that was what I was coming to. For me, when you ask me, like one image of great nature writing or great ecological writing that sits in my head, it's actually a book that's not about nature at all. Toni Morrison, who won the Nobel Prize, has a book called Beloved. It's about a mother and her journey in post-slavery America. And she has a tree on her back. It's actually a scar from a really traumatic past that actually looks like a tree. And when the author describes the tree, or she has a tree growing on her back with small buds and small leaves and oozing fruit, which is basically the sores that have become bad over time. That is the image in my head when I think about nature. It's about the flowers that bloom. So there's this character who's trying to escape prison, and he's running across state lines, and nobody knows, he doesn't know how to go or where to go. So somebody tells him, just follow the blossoming trees. As they blossom, just follow them and you'll reach where you have to. And so he goes through different trees. He knows which tree blossoms when, whether it's apple or pear, and he follows them and he finds himself at the location he needs to be. So this is the most potent kind of writing that sits with me. It's not this immaculate image. Like those are there, that's a great Windows desktop. Okay, but like for me, when I'm writing, it'll always be the tree on her back, or you know, the flowers that this person is looking at when he's escaping prison. In my book, there's this character called Looney. She uses hair to make landscapes on a handkerchief. Basically, dhage ki jagah, she uses hair instead of thread to make like the very elementary scenery we've all drawn in school, mountains, a house, you know, smoke coming out. She draws that with hair. So for me, that is nature. And I think that's the images that I gravitate towards.
In this book particularly, I'd say that I use nature as a moody character. I mean, sometimes it's really nice to the humans or animals inhabiting it, and other times it's not at all nice. For example, the excerpt I just read out, that one, then there's a story called Crown Shyness, where the trees are these sort of helpful guides, but also not, is how I would describe that. So yeah, even when nature is not a character, is not actively participating in the plot and is just in the backdrop, it still has a looming presence in the lives of the characters in the story. So yeah, that's how I look at nature in my stories.
Great, thank you. So we've been shown the little poster saying it's time for Q&A. Are there lingering questions? Questions about, there's Chintan's question that still hangs in the room about how do other budding writers. Chintan, do you want to address? Yeah, with Chintan's question, and then on to you.
So you asked how did we publish our first book, right? How difficult or easy that was? Okay. Honestly, I'm not really good at that. So with the first book that I had published, it had an odd format because the first half of the book was short stories and the second half was a novella. And within that there was time travel, there was historical fiction, there was collapse on us. I wish we had goal over here. So I knew that it would be a difficult book to market and even sort of to convince a publisher to, actually publish it. But thankfully, I did find a small indie publishing house who published it. And after that, I came to this. Again, I knew it wouldn't be easy to sell it, but this is what I wanted to do. And it's basically just my conviction that I can do this. That's how I proceeded with it.
I think we just have to be very honest that a lot of the work of talking about the book and how the book resonates is a different journey for everybody. I was someone who was very, when the book came out, it had taken so much from me emotionally that I took off to Darjeeling for 2 months. I was like, I need to go and just be by myself, figure out, I just need to be calm for a minute before just dropping into marketing or promotions or stuff like that. But I took a year's perspective and it came through a lot of hit and trials, through a lot of, some days are good, some days are bad, you're wondering what the book is. But the most fruitful parts I can tell you, there were like really kind beings from the law school who spoke before us. I had a great session at the law school talking about Glass Bottom. And that was one of the ways I realized that the audience may not have, there's just not one way to go to your audience or to your readership. It's not just the bookstore. It's the university, it's the business school, the law school, the medical school, the literature college. And it's always been my attempt to reach out to my readers very organically, either through small seminars or through lectures, and kind of work it that way, so that there's meaningful discussion. Yeah, that's what's worked for me.
It looks like we are out of time, so one last question, yes.
Hi, thank you so much for the discussion. My name is Asim. I'm a marine biologist, but I'm also an author. And funnily enough, I also choose speculative fiction as my means of telling stories. And I use the short story medium to convey that, because in my experience, I've found that short stories are like the limit of the attention span of a lot of people, so I choose that as my medium. But I was very curious, as authors who are trying to communicate climate-related fiction and kind of foster and generate conversations around the climate crisis, with the urgency of the climate crisis, I wanted to ask you, when you are considering the voice of the story, what do you think about using like an active voice or like a first-person narrative in conveying that immediacy and that urgency, as opposed to like a third-person narrative? Thank you.
Fantastic question, yeah.
I'd say in my book, I've mostly gone for the third person, but there is power in first person narration, because obviously you can put forward your thought process and write a more personal story. With the sea one, for example, if I had done no, sorry, not the sea one, sorry. There's another one which is about a housewife who decides to go birding because her kids have gone off to college. And it's a very cheesy plot in the sense that the husband does not appreciate her, and he's like, just find hobbies to do and stuff. And she starts to, she sees these groups of starlings and she finds meaning in them. And her family, her husband, her kids, they sort of humor her, okay, you're just really bored, so this is what you're saying. But towards the end, I won't obviously spoil it for you guys, but towards the end, we see that she was part of a larger picture of things, and what she did, what she witnessed, there was meaning in that. And if I had done a third person thing, then it wouldn't be as powerful or emotional when the twist comes right at the end. Because it's first person, because it's from her point of view, we feel more strongly about what happens at the end.
I don't think I have much to add, but I'll just say from a craft perspective, because you're a scientist, you're trying to write. I think just try both. I think some characters in my book are very, they came in a certain voice and I just had to channel it. For others, you do a lot of hit and trial. You see, okay, does the first person make sense for this particular piece? Does the third person? You can see the drafts where it flows naturally or where it's a challenge, right? So I think it is just practice. You just keep going at it, and at a certain point it clicks. For this book, they were all third persons, but as I said, Arth embodies a collective voice. So she hallucinates in the first person a lot of time. So it just came naturally. Like, she can't hallucinate in the third person, right? So it just comes with a lot of practice with the development of the story. But the short story is a very good medium to start with, because in a very succinct medium, you learn everything from dialogue to, the beginning, the middle, and the end, and all that jazz. So I think you're at the right, you're doing the right thing. You just have to keep going at it. Yeah.
Thank you so much to please give us all a hand of applause, and thank you all to our audience. The books are available at the back at the, I think, how do you pronounce it? So the bookshop there, which I cannot pronounce the name of. Thank you so much to Manisha, Benedict, for organizing and thinking of this session. Thank you all.
Thank you so much to all the panelists. I request you to kindly remain on the stage. We do have a token of appreciation on behalf of the GLF team, and to do the honors, I request Ms. Radhika Suri to join me on the stage. She is an advisor with the GLF team since the beginning and the author of Whispers of the Mangroves. And yes, let's all applaud because they deserve it for spending their valuable time with us in the 5th edition of the Green Literature Festival, for making us think about nature from a multi-dimensional perspective. Thank you so much to our host and the speakers. Can we please have a group photograph?